Have you ever looked up at the night sky and felt a strange, unsettling chill? Scientists call it the Fermi paradox, the terrifying reality that despite billions of habitable planets out there, the universe remains completely silent. For decades, humanity screamed into that darkness, broadcasting radio signals, praying for a whisper back, hoping to prove we weren't alone. But on a quiet Tuesday night, the silence didn't just break. It shattered. We always assumed that if an alien intelligence found us, they would arrive in giant ships over our cities. We were wrong. They didn't send an armada. They sent a line of code. It began at precisely 2 in the morning at a deep space observatory isolated in the high deserts of Chile. Dr. Ethan Vance, a man who had spent 12 years listening to the empty static of the cosmos, noticed a change on his monitors. Space noise is always chaotic, like the sound of rushing water. But this new signal was a mathematically perfect, rhythmic pulse that repeated every 3 seconds. It was tracing back to Kepler-186f, a planet thousands of light-years away, long believed to be a dead, frozen rock. Ethan's first instinct was that it had to be a system glitch. He initiated a hard reset of the facility's main servers. But the moment the screens flickered back to life, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The central monitor overrode his commands and opened a live video feed. It was a crystal-clear broadcast of Ethan himself, sitting in his chair, staring at the monitor. The terrifying part was that his facility didn't have webcams. The lens on his computer was physically broken. Someone, or something, was projecting his own image back to him from across the stars. And then, right below the video feed, words began typing out in perfect English. It read, "We see you, Ethan." Within seconds, the infection spread. The signal didn't just sit in that isolated observatory. It bypassed every government firewall on the planet in less than 3 seconds. It didn't destroy our systems, it colonized them. In Washington, London, Tokyo, and Islamabad, the screens of every military supercomputer, every cell phone, and every smart television locked up. They all displayed the exact same thing, a shifting, distorted satellite map of Earth, with bright red grids actively scanning the topography of our major cities. It was a global inventory. Then came the voice. It didn't sound like a monster, and it didn't sound alien. It sounded like an imitation of a human voice, but layered with thousands of different people speaking in absolute unison. The broadcast echoed through every speaker on Earth. The voice said, "Denizens of Earth, you are too late. You screamed into the dark, thinking you were safe in your isolation. We heard your primitive signals decades ago. We have traveled through the void. Not to meet you, and not to save you. We are here to claim what is ours." While panic erupted in the streets of every major city, a much darker secret was unraveling on the opposite side of the world. Deep beneath the thousands of feet of solid ice in Antarctica, a top-secret military research base known as Sector 7 was experiencing a catastrophe. 2 years prior, drilling teams had discovered a massive, pitch-black triangular artifact buried in the deep crust of the ice. It was made of an unknown, obsidian-like material that defied the periodic table. It didn't reflect light, it couldn't be cut by diamond drills, and it had remained completely dormant for 24 months. But the exact millisecond the Kepler signal hit Earth's atmosphere, the ancient artifact in Antarctica woke up. The black metal began to glow with a pulsing, toxic blue light, and strange geometric glyphs began crawling across its surface like living cells. The 2 lead scientists standing near the artifact suddenly dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as an unearthly screech filled the subterranean cavern. When they slowly stood back up and turned around, the military guards drew their weapons in horror. The scientists' eyes were gone. Their sockets were filled with a thick, liquid pitch-black void. Moving like puppets pulled by invisible strings, they looked directly at the commanding general behind the reinforced glass. With a synchronized, empty smile, they spoke with the exact same multi-layered voice that was broadcasting across the world. They said, "They have arrived." Suddenly, the Antarctic artifact unleashed a massive, blinding beam of blue energy. The beam blasted straight through miles of solid ice, tearing into the night sky like a colossal beacon shooting directly into deep space. Instantly, the global power grid collapsed. Every light on Earth went out, plunging the entire planet into a terrifying, silent darkness. But the true horror wasn't the blackout. The true horror was what the blue beacon revealed. As the energy wave washed over the upper atmosphere, it acted like a radar flare, illuminating the immediate space surrounding our planet. And there, hiding in the dark shadow of the moon, were thousands of massive, biomechanical structures. They weren't coming toward Earth. They were already here, waiting in orbit for the ground beacon to activate. The front door to our world had just been unlocked from the inside. Humanity has no planetary defenses, no interstellar weapons, and now, no communication. The longest night in human history has just begun, and the entities in the sky are about to descend. The global blackout had plunged Earth into a terrifying, primitive silence, but the true nightmare was unfolding just outside our atmosphere. The massive, biomechanical structures that had been hiding in the shadow of the moon were now in motion. They didn't descend like falling meteors, they glided down with an unnatural, silent grace, deflecting the friction of our atmosphere as if it didn't even exist. Millions of people looked up into the pitch-black night sky, watching as the stars were slowly blotted out by shapes that were miles wide, blocking the faint light of the cosmos. Back in the high desert of Chile, Drive, Ethan Vance was staring at completely dead equipment. The monitors that had previously shown his own face were now cold sheets of glass. Marcus, the chief technical officer, was frantically trying to ignite the facility's backup diesel generators, but nothing worked. The electromagnetic pulse emitted by the Antarctic beacon had permanently fried the circuitry of modern electronics. Every car engine, every generator, and every battery on Earth was dead. Humanity was completely blind, cut off from one another, and utterly defenseless. Suddenly, a heavy, vibrating hum rattled the observatory walls. It wasn't the sound of an engine, it was a low-frequency vibration that resonated inside Ethan's chest. He walked out onto the observation deck, looking up into the Andean sky. One of the massive biomechanical vessels had settled directly over their valley. It didn't possess rows of metallic plates or glowing windows like the spaceships in movies. Its skin looked organic yet metallic, shifting like dark liquid obsidian, absorbing the faint ambient starlight. It simply hovered there, a silent mountain of absolute dread, defying gravity without producing a single gust of wind. Before Ethan could even speak, a brilliant flash of pale, emerald green light erupted from the underbelly of the massive ship. It didn't burn or explode, it was a solid beam of light that shot directly into the center of the observatory courtyard. Marcus drew his sidearm, aiming it into the glowing mist, but as the light began to fade, they realized no alien soldiers were stepping out. Instead, the green light left behind a floating, metallic sphere, no larger than a human skull. The sphere spun slowly in midair, emitting a rhythmic clicking sound that perfectly matched the 3-second pulse of the original Kepler signal. The clicking stopped. The sphere split open from the center, projecting a 3-dimensional geometric map into the cold desert air. Ethan cautiously approached the projection. It was a highly detailed, rotating model of the human brain, but certain pathways were highlighted in a brilliant, unstable red. As Ethan stared at the glowing neural pathways, the multi-layered voice from the broadcast returned, echoing directly inside his mind rather than through his ears. The voice whispered, "We do not seek your cities, Ethan. We seek the hardware." At that exact moment, thousands of miles away in the subterranean ice cavern of Antarctica, General Vance was witnessing the horror of that statement. The two infected scientists, whose eyes had turned into pools of liquid black, were no longer moving like puppets. Their movements had become fluid, precise, and hyper-coordinated. They walked over to the facility's master control console, completely ignoring the armed guards who stood frozen in fear. Even though the facility's power grid was completely fried, the moment the scientists touched the dead metal console, the screens flickered to life, glowing with the same toxic blue light as the alien artifact. General Vance finally broke his paralysis and yelled for the guards to open fire. A barrage of bullets tore through the room, striking both scientists directly in the chest. But they didn't fall. They didn't even bleed. The bullet wounds simply closed instantly, sealing up with a thick, black substance that hummed with kinetic energy. One of the scientists turned his head a full 180 degrees to face the general. When he spoke, it wasn't just words. The sound frequency was so intensely powerful that the reinforced blast shield glass separating them began to spiderweb with cracks. The scientist said, "Your biology is inefficient, but your minds are perfect fuel." The black triangular artifact behind them began to expand, its obsidian skin folding outwards like an intricate piece of origami. Inside the structure lay a massive, pulsating core of dark matter, pulling the cold air of the cavern inward like a localized vacuum. The two infected scientists stepped directly into the open core. Instead of being crushed, their bodies began to dissolve into pure digital information, their neural pathways breaking down into millions of glowing binary lines that were sucked instantly into the artifact's core. The artifact wasn't a weapon meant to destroy Earth from space, it was a harvesting machine, and it had just begun processing its first human subjects. Back in Chile, Ethan watched in absolute horror as the floating sphere in front of him began to expand its projection. The model of the human brain vanished, replaced by a global map showing millions of tiny red dots lighting up across every continent. Every red dot represented a major human population center. Ethan realized the terrifying truth. The alien ships hovering over Earth's cities weren't preparing to drop bombs. They were deploying the emerald green beams on a massive, global scale. Outside the observatory, across the horizon, Ethan could see more green pillars of light striking the Earth in the distance, piercing through the dark atmosphere. He knew that in those cities, millions of people were currently looking into that light, their eyes turning to liquid black, their minds being overridden and prepared for harvest. Humanity wasn't facing an occupation or a war, we were facing an systemic liquidation. Our consciousness was being converted into fuel for a civilization that had outlived its own galaxy. Marcus grabbed Ethan's shoulder, his voice trembling as he looked up at the massive ship directly above them. The underbelly of the vessel was beginning to glow with that same pale, emerald green light, focusing its energy directly onto the observation deck where they stood. There was nowhere to run. The electromagnetic pulse had stripped them of their technology, and the cosmic hunters had already cornered them. As the green light expanded, engulfing the entire valley in a blinding, silent flash, Ethan felt an intense pressure building inside his skull, as if his memories and thoughts were being pulled out by a massive, gravitational force. His vision began to blur into a sea of binary numbers, and the last thing he saw before complete darkness was the silhouette of the massive biomechanical ship opening its cargo doors to receive the harvest. The first wave of the invasion is complete, and the harvesting of humanity has officially begun. The blinding emerald light had faded, leaving behind an eerie, suffocating silence in the Chilean valley. Dr. Ethan Vance opened his eyes, but he was no longer standing on the concrete observation deck. He wasn't even in his own body. He was floating in a boundless, liquid void of absolute darkness, surrounded by millions of glowing silver threads that stretched out into infinity. As he looked closer, he realized these threads weren't made of energy, they were made of memories. He could see glimpses of his childhood, the face of his mother, the day he first walked into the Atacama Observatory, all laid out like digital files. But he wasn't alone in this void. Billions of other threads were tangling together around him. He could feel the panic of a stranger in New York, the final thoughts of a child in Tokyo, and the fading screams of soldiers in Antarctica. The biomechanical ships hadn't killed them. They had pulled their consciousness out of their physical bodies, merging the entire human race into a singular, colossal digital matrix. This was the collective mind of the machine, a cosmic hard drive designed to store the mental energy of conquered worlds. But inside this massive matrix, something strange was happening to Ethan. Unlike the millions of minds that were dissolving into pure data, Ethan's consciousness remained solid. 12 years of training his brain to isolate specific frequencies in the chaotic static of deep space had given him an unnatural level of mental discipline. He could filter out the screams. He could focus. He realized that if his mind was now part of their network, then he didn't just exist inside the machine, he had access to it. With a surge of willpower, Ethan reached out and mentally grabbed one of the alien data streams pulsing through the void. Instantly, a wave of cosmic history crashed into his mind. He saw the true origin of the entities. They were called the Keepers of Kepler, a civilization that had abandoned their physical bodies millions of years ago to escape the death of their own star. To sustain their massive, biomechanical armada, they traveled from galaxy to galaxy, harvesting the neural energy of intelligent species. Humanity wasn't being punished, we were just the latest fuel source. But as Ethan searched deeper into the alien archive, he found a hidden file, a localized error in the system. The machine was experiencing a data leak in Sector 7, the subterranean bunker in Antarctica. Down on the frozen surface of Earth, inside the shattered remains of the Antarctic facility, General Vance was still alive. The massive blue beacon had ceased firing, leaving the cavern in a dim, frosty gloom. The black triangular artifact was still floating, but its surface was glitching violently, spitting out sparks of unstable blue electricity. The general, coughing through the smoke, crawled toward a heavy steel hatch in the floor. This wasn't just a research station, it was built over a network of old volcanic steam tunnels that ran deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, a makeshift fallout shelter. As General Vance dropped down into the dark tunnels, he found the survivors. A ragtag group of 30 individuals, engineers, Black Ops soldiers, and technicians who had been deep underground when the electromagnetic pulse hit. Because they were shielded by miles of volcanic rock and heavy ice, their brains hadn't been targeted by the emerald harvesting beams. They were the last uninfected humans on the continent, perhaps on the planet. But they weren't alone down there. The bunker's emergency analog radio, powered by an old hand-cranked generator, suddenly burst into life. It didn't emit static. It emitted a clear, precise human voice. It was Ethan. The survivors gathered around the radio in disbelief as Ethan's voice echoed through the dark tunnel. He explained that he was speaking to them directly from inside the alien network, using the artifact's glitching frequency to broadcast his thoughts back into the physical world. He told them that the collective human race was still alive, trapped as data inside the ships hovering in orbit. They weren't dead, and they could be downloaded back into their bodies, but time was running out. In less than 2 hours, the alien mothership would complete the encryption process, permanently locking human consciousness into their cosmic fuel cells. Ethan gave the survivors a single, desperate mission. The black artifact in the cavern was the central ground terminal connecting Earth to the orbital fleet. If they could overload its core using the facility's old nuclear thermal generator, it would create a massive data feedback loop. It would force the alien ships to dump their stored data back to the surface, reversing the harvest. General Vance looked at his remaining soldiers. They had no heavy weapons, no communication with the outside world, and the cavern above them was currently patrolled by the empty, puppet-like bodies of their former comrades. But they had a blueprint, a voice inside the machine, and the fate of 8 billion souls resting on their shoulders. As the soldiers loaded their analog mechanical rifles and prepared to breach the cavern, Ethan's voice on the radio began to distort, replaced by the heavy, multi-layered roar of the alien keepers. They had finally detected his intrusion. The silver threads around Ethan in the digital void began to turn into a suffocating, fiery red as the machine's antivirus software closed in to erase his consciousness forever. The counterattack has begun, and humanity's last stand is happening in the darkest depths of the ice. The fiery red code of the alien antivirus network was wrapping around Ethan's digital consciousness like liquid fire, constricting his thoughts, trying to crush his individuality and dissolve him into the faceless sea of human data. Every second felt like a physical weight pressing on his brain. He could feel his own memories fading, the layout of the observatory, the face of his colleagues, even his own name was slipping away. But he held onto a single, burning frequency, the analog radio signal connected to the underground tunnels of Antarctica. He had to keep the link open, even if it cost him his mind. Deep beneath the ice, General Vance and his remaining squad of Black Ops soldiers breached the heavy steel hatch, stepping back into the frozen gloom of the main cavern. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. In the center, the black triangular artifact was pulsing with a violent, unstable rhythm, casting long, erratic shadows across the ice walls. But the path to the nuclear thermal generator wasn't clear. Standing between the soldiers and the control console were 20 human bodies, the facility's former staff. Their eyes were still pools of bottomless liquid black, and their skin had taken on a pale, translucent gray tint. They weren't breathing, but they moved with a horrific, synchronized precision. The moment the soldiers entered, the puppets turned their heads in absolute unison, their jaws dropping open to emit a deafening, multi-layered electronic hiss that echoed off the cavern walls. General Vance didn't hesitate. He yelled the order, and the cavern erupted into chaos. Since modern electronic weapons were useless, the soldiers were using old-school, gas-operated mechanical rifles. Heavy gunfire tore through the freezing air. Bullets slammed into the infected staff, but the puppets didn't flinch or register pain. They kept advancing, their limbs jerking unnaturally, driven by the digital commands of the orbital fleet. The black substance inside their wounds hummed, absorbing the kinetic impact and sealing the tissue almost instantly. 2 soldiers were caught by the advancing horde. The moment the infected individuals touched the soldiers, bare skin, a visible spark of green static jumped between them. The soldiers' eyes instantly rolled back, turning solid black as their consciousness was ripped out of their bodies and uploaded into the sky, leaving their physical frames to collapse into mindless puppets joining the alien ranks. Realizing they were completely outmatched in a physical fight, General Vance grabbed a heavy satchel of mechanical thermite charges and locked eyes with Sergeant Miller. He shouted over the deafening gunfire, telling Miller to hold the line at all costs. The general sprinted toward the maintenance catwalk that led directly to the facility's old nuclear thermal generator. Inside the digital void, Ethan was screaming. The red alien code had entirely consumed his lower torso, turning his digital hands into static pixels. But through the agonizing pain, he managed to redirect a portion of the machine's processing power. He accessed the artifact's internal schematics and channeled that data down the analog radio wire. Suddenly, the old hand crank radio in the tunnel below started spitting out high-frequency audio tones. The tone was so specific that when it bounced into the main cavern, it acted as an acoustic jammer against the alien frequency controlling the puppets. The infected staff abruptly froze, their bodies twitching violently as the signal from the sky was disrupted by the analog counter-frequency. General Vance used that split-second window of absolute stillness to reach the generator console. The old machinery was entirely mechanical, relying on physical levers and hydraulic pressure valves. He gripped the primary coolant release lever, the valve that would cause the nuclear core to rapidly overheat, sending a massive surge of pure, unguided thermal and kinetic energy directly into the floating black artifact. But as his hand tightened around the steel lever, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the console. It was the chief scientist of the facility, the first man who had been turned. His face was twisted into that same terrifying, synchronized smile, and his hand was resting on the manual override switch that could lock the coolant valves forever. Through the static-filled radio speaker on the general's vest, Ethan's voice broke through one last time, barely recognizable, a mixture of a human sob and digital distortion. He gasped out, "Do it now, General. Don't look at his face. Trigger the feedback loop before they erase me." General Vance looked into the pitch-black eyes of his former friend, raised his mechanical sidearm, and fired 3 rounds directly into the override switch, destroying it completely. With his other hand, he threw his entire body weight onto the coolant lever, pulling it down into the emergency release position. Deep inside the generator, the heavy lead rods retracted. The core temperature skyrocketed instantly into the thousands of degrees, and a blinding surge of raw, untamed electrical energy traveled up the conduits, blasting into the base of the floating triangular artifact. The black metal began to screech, its geometric glyphs violently fracturing as the system overload began. The final battle for Earth's survival has reached its boiling point, and the machine is about to fracture. The nuclear core's overload sent a massive, blinding column of raw electrical energy directly into the floating black artifact. The obsidian skin of the machine didn't just crack, it began to peel apart like a dying star, emitting a high-pitched sonic scream that shattered every remaining piece of glass in the Antarctic facility. Inside the digital void, the effect was instantaneous. The suffocating red antivirus code that had been systematically deleting Ethan's mind suddenly froze, fractured, and dissolved into static pixels. The endless silver threads containing the memories of 8 billion human souls began to vibrate violently, breaking free from the machine's central matrix. The feedback loop had successfully corrupted the alien encryption. The cosmic hard drive was crashing. Down in the cavern, General Vance threw himself behind a fallen steel girder as the artifact reached its breaking point. The two scientists with the liquid black eyes suddenly stopped smiling. The black void in their sockets began to boil, turning back into white sclera as the alien data stream controlling them was violently severed. Across the room, the entire horde of infected staff collapsed to the floor, convulsing as their original human consciousnesses were suddenly slammed back into their physical neural pathways. Then came the data dump. The fractured artifact in Antarctica unleashed a massive, outward wave of pale blue kinetic energy. It didn't destroy physical matter, it acted as a global electromagnetic reversal. The energy wave rippled across the surface of the Earth at the speed of light, passing through mountains, oceans, and cities. In New York, London, Tokyo, and Lahore, millions of mindless bodies dropping to the pavement suddenly gasped for air. The thick, liquid black vanished from their eyes, replaced by the familiar color of human irises. People looked at their hands, confused, waking up from what felt like a collective, endless nightmare. The memories that had been pulled into the sky were crashing back down, anchoring themselves into the brains of their rightful owners. But the data reversal didn't just affect the humans on the ground. Up in orbit, the massive, biomechanical warships began to malfunction. Because their entire infrastructure was driven by the collective consciousness of the minds they harvested, the sudden, violent loss of 8 billion data streams tore through their systems like a digital plague. Dr. Ethan Vance opened his eyes with a violent gasp. He was back on the concrete observation deck in the Atacama Desert, his chest heaving as his lungs fought for oxygen. Marcus was lying next to him, groaning as he clutched his head. Ethan looked up at the night sky. The gargantuan, miles-wide obsidian ship that had been hovering directly over their valley was no longer floating with silent grace. Its liquid metal skin was flashing with erratic green and blue sparks. The internal gravity stabilizers of the vessel failed, and the massive structure began to list heavily to one side, its organic hull tearing itself apart under its own immense weight. Across the horizon, the scene was the same. The invading fleet was falling out of the sky, burning up in the upper atmosphere like a shower of dying meteors. The hunters had become the prey of their own stolen energy. Ethan stumbled into the observatory control room. The heavy feedback loop had done something else, it had remagnetized the global grid. The monitors flickered back to life, no longer displaying alien codes or hijacked maps, but standard, human operating systems. The analog radio speaker on his desk crackled with heavy static, and then a tired, gravelly voice broke through. It was General Vance, calling out from the depths of the Antarctic ice. The general gasped into the microphone, asking if anyone could hear him, stating that the terminal was destroyed and the core was dead. Ethan gripped the mic, tears welling in his eyes, and replied that he could hear him loud and clear, and that the sky was falling. Humanity had survived the harvest, but the victory was bittersweet. As Ethan looked at the global satellite feed slowly coming back online, he could see the wreckage of thousands of alien ships scattered across the continents. We had won the first battle, but we had revealed our location to a civilization that spans across galaxies. The original Kepler signal was gone, but the ruins of their technology now belong to Earth. The invasion was over, but the world would never be the same. Humanity had just been handed the keys to interstellar technology, and a new era of cosmic warfare was about to dawn. The harvest has failed, and Earth has taken its first steps into a much larger, more dangerous universe. The wreckage of the alien fleet lay burning across the continents, a trillion tons of biomechanical obsidian metal melting into the soil of Earth. Humanity had done the impossible. We had survived the cosmic liquidation, but the scars left behind were permanent. The global blackout was over, but the world that woke up was fundamentally changed. We were no longer a divided species fighting over borders. We were the survivors of the first galactic harvest, and for the first time in human history, we were united by a singular, burning desire for retribution. 6 months after the collapse of the Kepler Armada, the high desert of Chile was no longer a silent sanctuary for astronomers. Substation 4 had been completely rebuilt, transformed into a heavily fortified planetary defense hub. Dr. Ethan Vance stood inside the central command room, staring at a massive, holographic display. The monitors were no longer human-made glass, they were constructed from the reverse-engineered liquid metal harvested from the fallen ships. Next to him stood General Vance, who had traveled from the icy depths of Antarctica to witness this moment. The shattered black artifact from Sector 7 had been brought to Chile, its core stabilized and hardwired into Earth's new quantum defense grid. Humanity had not just cleaned up the wreckage, we had weaponized it. We had learned their language, mastered their encryption, and integrated their hyper-advanced technology into our own infrastructure. Ethan looked at the general, his fingers hovering over a glowing blue interface. For 12 years, Ethan had listened to the silence of the space, praying for a sign. Now, he was the one holding the microphone. He looked at the console and initiated the sequence. The stabilized Antarctic artifact began to glow, not with the toxic, dominating alien light, but with a steady, fierce golden hum, the color of human resilience. The machine expanded, opening a localized wormhole in the upper atmosphere. A massive, concentrated beam of golden energy shot straight out from the Chilean desert, piercing through the solar system, targeting the exact coordinates of the Kepler system thousands of light-years away. This wasn't a distress call, and it wasn't a broadcast for peace. It was a declaration of war. Ethan spoke into the global transmitter, his voice echoing across every speaker on Earth, and traveling along the beam into the deep void of space. He said, "To the keepers of Kepler, you heard our whispers decades ago, and you thought we were prey. You came to harvest our minds, but you left us your technology. We have broken your codes. We have mastered your machines. And now, we know exactly where you are. The silence of the universe is over. We are coming for you." The golden beam vanished into the cosmic dark, carrying the defiance of 8 billion survivors directly to the doorstep of the invaders. Earth was no longer hiding in the shadows of the galaxy, waiting to be found. We had stepped out into the light, armed with the weapons of our enemy, ready to take the fight to the stars. The age of human isolation was dead. The age of the human empire had begun.
Thanks for watching. If you love epic sci-fi stories and unforgettable adventures, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to HYF Sci-Fi. Join our growing community, and we'll see you in the next journey beyond the stars.